What defines a human? We're hairless apes, obviously. Bipedal. Good at running. At least some of us are. We have sophisticated language, not just one language, but hundreds, maybe thousands, depending on how you define it. We're obligate tool users. Basically, we can't get anything done without them. We're creative, and we've spread across the entire planet. I believe we can trace all of these features back to the owners of skulls like this one. This is Sangiran 17, or at least a plastic replica of it I'm holding here. It was excavated on the island of Java in Indonesia, and it belonged to someone who lived about 1.5 million years ago. Today, we call these hominins Homo erectus. If you're using these videos to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make them. So, subscribe. Maybe tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Comments are like Berlin at breakfast, Boston at bedtime, all at once. In my opinion, these were the first hominins who truly deserved to be called human. From their biology to their technology, their global reach, maybe even their artistic and linguistic abilities, these guys and girls were a massive leap forward in human evolution. And today, I just want to break down what made them so special, why I think they were the first true humans. Homo erectus is one of the best studied fossil species, yet its origins remain mostly unclear. After a major glaciation about 2.5 million years ago, multiple species of early Homo and Australopithecus overlapped in East Africa, but the identities of these species are still debated. Homo habilis has long been considered the first member of our genus Homo because it was found with stone tools. But some anthropologists think it's actually too primitive to belong in our genus at all. It might be closer to Australopithecus. Homo rudolfensis seems to be a larger version of habilis, but whether it's a distinct species is still up for debate. Most anthropologists recognize habilis and rudolfensis as separate species, but since it's still contested, it's easier just to group them as early Homo. Because the split between Australopithecines and early Homo is still blurry, it's hard to pinpoint exactly when and where Homo erectus first appeared. The oldest Homo erectus fossils the scientific community agrees on are about 1.9 million years old, from Kobifora in Kenya, overlapping in time with both habilis and rudolfensis. But one of the most famous early Homo erectus fossils actually comes from outside Africa, from Dmanisi, Georgia, and dates to 1.8 million years ago. Incredible. That discovery showed that Homo erectus had already made long migrations out of Africa very soon after evolving, and that it didn't need a big brain to do it. Now, hold on, I can hear you saying, "Small brains, Stefan." These are supposed to be the first humans. What are we if not big walking brains? Well, within what we call Homo erectus, there's actually a huge amount of variation. They lived for nearly 2 million years across 3 continents. There's so much variation that sometimes they're split into other names like Homo ergaster. But today, we'll just lump them all together as Homo erectus. Despite that variation and their enormous time span, there are still key uniting features we can point to as definitively erectus. Compared to early Homo and Australopithecines, they had larger bodies, smaller teeth and smaller jaws. But the first major change was their big brains. Early erectus, like Homo ergaster from Dmanisi, had a brain size of about 540 cubic centimeters, bigger than a chimpanzee, but not by much. 500,000 years later, erectus specimens like Sangiran 17 from Indonesia had brain sizes around 1,200 cubic centimeters. For perspective, a modern Homo sapiens like you or me averages about 1,350 cubic centimeters. So within 500,000 years, they'd basically tripled their brain size, almost reaching modern levels. That's massive. Erectus was also the first hominin capable of long-distance running. We know this from their short, bowl-shaped pelvises. Mathematical models suggest they could run for up to 5 hours straight, which is definitely beyond my abilities in my current state. Of course, you can't run that long if you're covered in thick hair. Interestingly, genetic studies show that the genes for dark skin evolved around 1.2 million years ago, meaning that by then our skin had already been exposed to the sun. So Erectus was almost certainly the first kind of mostly hairless hominin. These traits might sound obvious today, a bit of a yawn big deal moment. But in reality, their importance can't be overstated. Together they marked huge changes in the physical and behavioral package that defined Homo erectus. They didn't just look like upright chimps, they looked much more like us. They walked farther to find food, and the food they ate was higher quality, enough to fuel those growing brains. Erectus wasn't just an upright ape, they lived a lifestyle that would stay familiar to humans for the rest of the Paleolithic. Now, it's hard to say exactly how Homo erectus hunted, but from the bones they left behind and the marks on them, we know they had primary access to the most nutritious parts of large animals. They weren't just scavengers, and these weren't small animals either. We're talking hippos, giraffes, massive prey. So however they did it, they were clearly capable of advanced hunting. Running and hunting, sure, that's a huge leap forward, but another defining feature of Homo sapiens is language. So, could Homo erectus talk? That's a tough question. For language to exist, you need certain biological conditions. The first is a large brain, which Erectus had, but just because it's big doesn't mean it's wired for speech. You also need higher cognitive function. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist, just a guy in a garage talking to a spoon, but according to research, the evolution of two genes, sRGAP2C and sRGAP2D, is linked to higher brain connectivity. And interestingly, those genes seem to have evolved right around the same time Homo erectus appears in the fossil record. Now, I'm not saying Erectus had language as complex as ours, far from it. But language, like everything else, evolved gradually. It's unlikely it appeared fully formed only in Homo sapiens. It's not unreasonable to think Erectus had some form of proto-language, maybe sophisticated vocalizations, or even gestures, a kind of sign language, perhaps. It's hard to say, of course, because words and gestures don't fossilize, but if we look at the tools they left behind, the technology, it's clear they were incredibly intelligent. The innovation most associated with Homo erectus, and one that likely gave them a huge evolutionary edge, is fire. Earlier, hominins spent enormous amounts of time and energy chewing raw meat and tough plants. That's why Australopiths had such massive jaws. But once we learned to control fire, it did much of the work for us. It made food easier to digest, freed up energy for brain growth, and allowed our guts to shrink. It's a beautiful theory, but there's a catch. The earliest solid evidence for controlled fire, accepted by most archaeologists, comes from Israel and dates to about 780,000 years ago, long after big brains already appeared. There are possible earlier sites, like Kubifora in Kenya, that could push fire use back to 1.5 million years ago, but it's hard to be certain. Humans don't have a monopoly on starting fires. They can happen perfectly naturally on their own. Given the limited evidence for deliberate fire use, it raises an interesting question. How did Homo erectus expand into new territories, especially colder ones? How did they manage that? Without fire to keep them warm. Maybe they huddled together. Maybe they had some kind of primitive clothing. Maybe both. Or maybe neither. It's even possible our ancestors weren't cooking with fire at all. Soil samples from Olduvai Gorge, dated to around 1.7 million years ago, suggest the area might have had natural hot springs. That led researchers to wonder, what role did that hot water play in our evolution? Instead of roasting meat, plants, and seeds, were we boiling them? I absolutely love that idea. I can't help but compare it to those Japanese macaques that soak in hot springs. Just imagine an ancient Homo erectus sitting in a steaming pool, relaxing, having an amazing time, the same way we would. It's so humanizing. I really hope that's how our evolution played out, that we evolved in hot tubs. While we're on that subject, there's another big debate around Homo erectus and water. Obviously, the Homo erectus groups that left Africa didn't do it consciously. They were almost certainly following animals, taking advantage of ecological niches, just following their food. And as a result, they gradually spread across the world. But in Southeast Asia, they may have made some truly deliberate migrations. Recently, a new hominin species was found on the island of Luzon in the Philippines. And a few years ago, stone tools dated to around 700,000 years ago were also discovered there. What's remarkable about these finds is that the Philippines were already islands back then. There's no possible land route to reach them. At the very least, they would have needed to cross several miles of open sea. Though I haven't found an exact distance, it's at least a few miles. So naturally, the question is, how did these hominins get there? Was it an accident? Were they swept away by a tsunami? Or was it intentional? Did they deliberately set out to cross the sea and settle in a new land? That question has huge implications for their intelligence, something we'll come back to later. Now, this is a Paleolithic hand axe, a real one this time, not plastic. The evolution of Homo erectus coincides with the sudden appearance of this new kind of tool in the archaeological record. And while it might look simple, it actually represents a giant leap forward for humankind. Before this, earlier hominins were making much cruder tools. They didn't really shape the core of the stone. They just created a cutting edge and stopped there. Acheulean tools, on the other hand, were flaked on both sides. It was a true revolution. Even a basic one like this might require removing 20 or 30 flakes to achieve this neat, symmetrical shape. That shows a remarkable degree of creative thinking, the ability to look at a raw stone and visualize the finished tool hidden inside it. It's ingenious, a clear sign of intelligence unique to our genus. Acheulean hand axes probably didn't have a single purpose. They were likely used for hunting, definitely for butchering, and possibly even for working wood and bone. They were the original Swiss Army knife. Heavy, yes, but you could absolutely butcher an animal with one, or kill something if you needed to. How much Homo erectus worked with wood and bone is harder to say. The oldest wooden spears we've found so far are the roughly 500,000-year-old Schöningen spears, which survived mostly through sheer luck. They were probably made by Neanderthals or proto-Neanderthals, but they're from roughly the same era as Homo erectus. And honestly, I believe erectus would have been more than capable of making something similar. If you can take 20 or 30 careful steps to turn a rock into a hand axe, you can definitely sharpen a stick. As for bone tools, the record is limited, but not empty. Some of the most striking examples come from Olduvai Gorge, including a beautiful possible barbed point. That's incredible. If Homo erectus made that, and evidence suggests they did, it's another powerful example of their intelligence. If tool-making and tool use are defining features of humanity, then Homo erectus absolutely belongs in the human club. No doubt about it. Oh, my legs are so stiff. Seriously. Bloody hell. Out of all the defining features we've talked about today, art might be the most human of all. No other animal creates art the way we do. Not even close. So if we're asking whether Homo erectus was truly human, whether they made art is a crucial piece of that question. The best, and perhaps only, example of creative expression by a Homo erectus individual is this shell found in Java. The layer containing it dates to between 500,000 and 400,000 years ago, well before Homo sapiens existed. And as you can see, someone carved lines into it. Do those lines count as art, as a symbolic act, or were they just idle scratches from some ancient hand? In my opinion, it doesn't matter. Either way, it's extraordinary. Just like language, our artistic expression is something we evolved to do, something we learned over time, and maybe all the creativity we see around us today began with a simple, careless act, a scratch on a shell. Maybe that one small moment connected a few neurons that had never connected before, and from there led to everything beautiful we see around us today. Not bad, if I do say so myself. Eat your heart out. There's a new artist in town. Now, something totally blew my mind when I first learned about it. Just recently, in 2025, archaeologists made an incredible discovery off the coast of Java, Indonesia. During dredging operations in the Madura Strait, just regular marine construction work, they found over 6,000 fossilized remains from 36 different vertebrate species, and buried among them were 2 Homo erectus skull fragments dating back about 140,000 years. These fossils came from what used to be a massive landmass called Sundaland, which is now completely underwater. During the Ice Ages, when sea levels were much lower, this region connected Java to mainland Asia. Homo erectus lived there, hunting water buffalo, eating turtles, basically thriving in this lush river valley ecosystem. The amazing thing about these discoveries is that they show cut marks on turtle bones and broken buffalo bones, clear signs of active hunting, not just scavenging. Earlier Homo erectus populations in Java didn't show this kind of advanced hunting behavior, so either these later groups developed new techniques, or, and this is wild, they learned them from more modern human populations moving into Asia. Different human species possibly teaching each other how to hunt. That's fascinating. Everywhere we find erectus, we see that it lived for a very long time. Its fossil record spans nearly 2 million years, from roughly 2 million years ago in Ethiopia to about 117,000 years ago in Java. So what finally caused erectus to disappear? We're still not completely sure, but changing climate likely played a big role. In Indonesia, for example, open woodlands gradually transformed into the dense rainforests we see today. As conditions became hotter and more humid, maybe erectus simply couldn't adapt fast enough. Still, erectus's legacy lived on. As it spread across the globe, it may have left behind isolated populations that eventually evolved into new species. One prime example is Homo floresiensis, found on the island of Flores in Indonesia. The fossils we've discovered so far date from about 700,000 to 70,000 years ago, which, in evolutionary terms, is incredibly recent. These adults stood only about 1 meter tall, earning them the nickname hobbits. Most researchers believe Floresiensis descended from erectus and went through a process known as island dwarfism. Not everyone agrees, though. Some argue they descended from an even earlier, more primitive species, maybe a small group of Australopithecus that somehow made it out of Africa. But considering erectus lived in this region for such a long time, it's the most likely ancestor. Still, the fact that Floresiensis experienced island dwarfism suggests erectus wasn't capable of crossing water habitually. If they had been, they could have left the island whenever they wanted, gotten new resources elsewhere, and that dwarfing pressure wouldn't have been so extreme. Then there's the strange case of Homo naledi, discovered deep in a South African cave in 2013. 15 individuals were found in a single chamber. Mysterious, to say the least. While we don't know for certain if erectus was their direct ancestor, it's a strong possibility. The time ranges overlap, and Naledi shows surprisingly modern features not seen in early Homo or Australopithecus. We're pretty confident erectus gave rise to at least 3 later species: us, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. The exact identity of the last common ancestor between us, Neanderthals, and Denisovans is still debated, but it's clear erectus sits on our family tree. The question is, did we descend directly from it? Some anthropologists, a small minority, think so. This idea is called the multi-regional hypothesis, which suggests that Homo erectus populations around the world gradually evolved into Homo sapiens through continuous gene flow, despite being separated by vast distances. It's a minority view for a reason, though. Here's why. Now that we know Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans, it's tempting to say, well, that means the multi-regional hypothesis was right. But the truth is, yes and no. Thanks to genetic research, we now know human evolution happened across multiple regions: Africa, Europe, and Asia. So in that sense, it was multi-regional. But the original hypothesis didn't give Africa any special role. Fossil and genetic evidence, on the other hand, shows that we're still predominantly an African species. Most of our evolution happened there, though not exclusively there. Small amounts of interbreeding with other archaic humans occurred, but not much overall. Others believe there was an intermediate species. The theory goes that erectus populations remaining in Africa evolved into Homo heidelbergensis around 800,000 years ago. Heidelbergensis then migrated out of Africa. The ones who stayed evolved into Homo sapiens, while those who traveled to Europe and Asia became Neanderthals and Denisovans. The details of how all these species relate are still murky, a debate famously called the muddle in the middle. It's incredibly tough to solve because fossils from that key time period, roughly 800,000 to 500,000 years ago, are rare, and every new discovery seems to complicate the picture even more. Honestly, it's just hard to speak with certainty about events that happened 500,000 to 1,000,000 years ago. I'd like to end with an analogy. Whenever we watch chimpanzees or gorillas play or interact as families, we can't help but see ourselves in them. Their gestures, expressions, games, it's all so familiar. Now imagine we could travel back 1,000,000 years, to a cave in Indonesia, and watch a family of erectus sitting around a fire, cooking, making tools, laughing, maybe even talking. We'd instantly recognize them as human. Despite all our differences, their humanity would be unmistakable. You could say there's a little erectus in all of us, because for the last 300,000 years, we, Homo sapiens, have been the only human species on Earth. But that's actually not normal. For most of the past 2,000,000 years, multiple human species coexisted. Homo erectus in Asia, early Homo sapiens in Africa, Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Siberia, Floresiensis on islands, Naledi in caves. The world was full of different kinds of humans. They weren't just living in isolated bubbles. Recent evidence suggests they were interacting, trading, maybe fighting, and definitely interbreeding in some cases. The genetic data makes that crystal clear. Non-African modern humans carry about 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. Some populations also have Denisovan DNA. We're literally walking around with fragments of these other human species inside us. That completely changes the story of human evolution. It's not a straight line from ape to human. It's a branching tree, full of side paths and species, most of which went extinct, but not before leaving their mark on us. Homo erectus is the trunk of that tree. Everything else branches off from them. Now I want to talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough attention: Homo erectus emotions. Yeah, I know. That sounds strange. How could we possibly know what they felt? We can't, not directly, but we can make some pretty good guesses based on their behavior and biology. They cared for their elderly and sick, and that takes empathy, compassion, and a sense of social responsibility. The old man from Dmanisi with no teeth. Someone had to take care of him, feed him soft food, keep him alive when he couldn't feed himself. That's love. That's humanity. They buried their dead. The evidence is still debated, but there are Homo erectus sites where bodies appear to have been deliberately placed. If that's true, it means they understood death, ritual, maybe even memory, the act of honoring the deceased. Those are deeply emotional, deeply human behaviors. They made art, or at least marks on shells that might have been art. even if it was just absent-minded doodling. That shows a wandering mind, one that sees patterns, plays with ideas, and imagines. That's creativity. That's imagination. They probably had some form of language, maybe not as complex as ours, but a way to share information, to coordinate hunts, teach children, and tell stories. Language at its core is about connection. It's how we build relationships, share experiences, and create culture. If Erectus had even a basic language, then they had rich social lives and complex emotional bonds. Think about a Homo erectus teenager. Yes, they had those too. They matured faster than we do, but there was still that period between childhood and adulthood. Imagine that teenager testing limits, trying to impress their friends, falling in love for the first time, or worrying about their place in the group. All those universal parts of adolescence, they probably felt those too. Now imagine a Homo erectus parent watching their child take their first steps, make their first tool, or come back from their first successful hunt. Pride, joy, fear for their safety, hope for their future. Those feelings don't require a modern brain or complex language. They're wired into all mammals that care for their young. And Homo erectus was definitely a caring, successful parent species. They had to be, to raise children to adulthood in such harsh conditions. Picture the terror of facing down a charging hippo with nothing but stone tools and wooden spears, the adrenaline, the fear, but also the courage to stand your ground because your family needed food. Imagine the exhaustion after a 5-hour persistence hunt, and the wave of relief when you finally bring down that antelope. Then the comfort of sitting by the fire afterward, warm, fed, safe, surrounded by family and friends. Homo erectus felt all of that. They were human in every way that matters. They loved, they feared, they hoped, they grieved, they celebrated. They weren't primitive brutes stumbling through prehistory. They were people, complex, emotional, intelligent people, living full lives in a world that was both more dangerous and more beautiful than ours. And honestly, that should humble us. We like to think we're special, unique, the pinnacle of evolution. But Homo erectus was doing just fine without smartphones, cities, or the internet. They had everything that actually matters for a good life: strong social bonds, meaningful work, connection to the natural world, and a sense of belonging. So what have we really gained in the 300,000 years since we evolved from them? Technology, sure. Longer lifespans, better medicine, more comfort. But have we gained more happiness? More fulfillment? More meaning? I'm not sure we have. Homo erectus lived for nearly 2 million years. That's not just survival, that's success. They found a way of life that was sustainable, adaptable, and deeply human. They spread across 3 continents, thriving in tropical forests, temperate woodlands, and semi-deserts. They raised children, generation after generation. They preserved culture, passed down knowledge, all without writing, schools, or the internet. We've only been Homo sapiens for about 300,000 years, and civilization for just 10,000. We're infants compared to Erectus, and already we're facing existential threats of our own making. Climate change, nuclear weapons, environmental collapse, biodiversity loss. Homo erectus never did that. They lived in balance with their world. They took what they needed, but didn't destroy the ecosystems they relied on. Maybe that's the real lesson of Homo erectus. Being human isn't about having the biggest brain or the newest tech. It's about caring for each other, adapting to challenges, living sustainably, finding meaning and joy in simple things, building communities that last, not for decades or centuries, but for hundreds of thousands of years. Homo erectus understood that. They lived it every day, and somewhere along the way, we forgot it. But it's not too late to remember. We still carry their genes, their instincts, their potential. Every human alive today is a direct descendant of Homo erectus. We are them, just with updates. The foundation is still there. The capacity for resilience, cooperation, sustainable living and joy without excess. All of that still exists in us, because it existed in them. So when you look at that plastic skull or that stone hand axe, you're not seeing some primitive, extinct species. You're looking at your ancestor, your incredibly successful, deeply human, profoundly admirable ancestor, who survived and thrived for nearly 2 million years and gave you the gift of being human. That's something worth honoring. That's something worth learning from. That's something worth carrying forward. Now, let's talk about something that might be bugging you. If Homo erectus was so successful, why aren't they still around? What finally wiped them out after nearly 2 million years? The truth is, it's complicated, and honestly, we don't fully know. Different erectus populations disappeared at different times, for different reasons. The last confirmed Homo erectus fossils come from Java, at a site called Ngandong, dated between 117,000 and 108,000 years ago. That's incredibly recent. Modern humans were already walking the earth. Neanderthals were living in Europe, and Erectus was still hanging on in Indonesia. So, what happened to those Java populations? The best guess: climate change. The environment shifted. Open woodlands and savannas turned into dense tropical rainforests, hotter, wetter, with different food sources and new challenges. Maybe Erectus just couldn't adapt fast enough this time. After almost 2 million years of survival, they finally hit an environmental curveball they couldn't dodge. But here's the thing: Erectus didn't really go extinct. They evolved. They transformed into other species. Some groups became Homo heidelbergensis. Some of those became Neanderthals and Denisovans. Others became us, Homo sapiens. Erectus's genes didn't vanish. They just got remixed and updated. Think of it this way: your great-great-grandfather isn't here anymore, but he's not gone. He's in you, in your DNA, your features, your biology. That's Erectus. They're not extinct. They're ancestral. And there's a difference. Some Erectus groups, the ones that got stuck on islands, took evolution in weird directions. Homo floresiensis, the hobbit humans, probably descended from Erectus. They got stranded on Flores Island, and over hundreds of thousands of years evolved smaller bodies and brains. Island dwarfism. It's a known phenomenon, but still wild to think about. Tiny humans with chimp-sized brains hunting pygmy elephants on an island, while modern humans in Africa were making art, jewelry, and complex tools. That's just insane. The diversity of human evolution is staggering. Then there's Homo naledi, those strange humans found deep in a South African cave. Small brains, a mix of primitive and modern traits, maybe even burying their dead. They might have been Erectus descendants who evolved their own way after isolation. We're still piecing that puzzle together. The point is, Erectus didn't have one ending. They had many. Multiple branches, multiple experiments, most of which eventually went extinct, but not before trying their own version of humanity. That's the real story of human evolution. It's not one straight line from ape to human. It's a tangled web of species branching off, testing different body shapes, brain sizes, and ways to survive. Most failed eventually, but together they built the story of what it means to be human. And then there's us, Homo sapiens, the last ones standing, the final surviving branch of the human family tree. We evolved in Africa somewhere between 300,000 and 200,000 years ago, probably from a population of Homo heidelbergensis, the newest experiment in being human. But we still don't know if we'll be a success story. We've only been around for about 300,000 years, which sounds long until you remember Erectus lasted nearly 2 million. We've had civilization for just 10,000 years. Industrial society? Barely 200. We're babies on the evolutionary timescale. So, are we going to make it? Are we going to match Erectus's record, or are we just a brief, brilliant flash that burns out too fast? Because right now, things don't look great. Climate change, environmental collapse, nuclear weapons, biodiversity loss. We're creating existential threats faster than we can solve them. Erectus never did that. They lived sustainably for 2 million years. They adapted to change without destroying their world. They thrived without endless consumption or overgrowth. What's our excuse? We've got bigger brains, complex language, advanced tools, and centuries of knowledge. We have science, medicine, technology. And yet, we can't seem to live in balance with our own planet. Something Erectus managed effortlessly. Maybe intelligence isn't enough. Maybe survival needs more than just being smart. Maybe it takes wisdom, restraint, long-term thinking, real care for future generations, the kind Erectus seemed to understand. Now, I'm not romanticizing them. I'm not saying we should go live in caves again. Modern medicine is amazing. Technology is incredible. I like not dying from an infected wound or bad water, but we can still learn from Erectus. We can borrow what worked: community, sustainability, cooperation, living within limits, passing down culture and knowledge, adapting to change without wrecking the world around us. Those aren't primitive ideas, they're sophisticated survival strategies, and they kept Erectus alive for 2 million years. If we want to match that record, if we want to be good ancestors to whoever comes after us, we've got to remember those lessons. We need to think beyond the next election or the next profit report. We need to care about what happens in 1,000 years, 10,000, 100,000, because that's the timescale that matters for a species. That's the timescale Erectus lived on, and if we can't think that far ahead, we're not going to make it. The good news? We still can, because we're their descendants. Their adaptability, their resilience, their creativity, it's still in us. We just need to wake it up, to remember who we are and where we came from. We're not separate from nature. We're not above evolution. We're not the final chapter. We're just the latest one. And this story, the story that started with Erectus 2 million years ago, is still being written. The ending isn't decided yet. So what kind of ancestors do we want to be? Do we want to be the generation that figured it out, that built a civilization meant to last for millennia? Or do we want to be the one that had everything and threw it away? Erectus gave us a blueprint. They proved it's possible to thrive for millions of years without destroying it all. Now it's up to us. We have to decide that the future matters more than right now, that community matters more than greed, that long-term survival matters more than short-term gain. If we can do that, if we can keep the best of Erectus while carrying forward the best of us, we might just make it. We might become good ancestors. And maybe, 2 million years from now, they'll still be humans, whatever they've become, looking back at us the way we look back at Erectus, with respect, with gratitude, with recognition that we gave them what they needed to survive. That's the legacy Erectus left us. That's the responsibility we carry. And that's the challenge in front of us. Can we rise to it? Can we be worthy of that gift? Can we pay it forward? I hope so. I really do. Because when you trace our story all the way back, when you realize how long humans have been here, it changes everything. We tend to think history is short. Civilization is 5,000 years old, agriculture 10,000, modern humans 300,000. But the real story, the deep human story, starts 2 million years ago with Homo erectus, 2 million years. No writing, no agriculture, no cities. Just people, living, loving, struggling, and succeeding, generation after generation, for so long that the total number of lives lived is beyond imagination, and every single one of them was a full human being, not primitive, not simple, not less than. They dreamed, they feared, they loved, they watched sunsets, they told stories by firelight, they held their children, they mourned their dead, they laughed with friends, they wondered about the stars. 2 million years of that. 2 million years of us. All of it mostly gone now, except for bones, stones, and echoes in the dust. And yet, not gone at all, because we're still here. Wait for next part, thanks.